Hello once again and welcome to Bulldogs Unleashed, our weekly look at the club and the NRL from behind the scenes, brought to you by Reclaim the Game. And we have special guests this week from two very different, very successful eras for the Bulldogs, Luke Patten and Steve Gearin. Thank you very much for joining us, boys.
Thanks for having us, Bill.
And we've got some great history to talk about a little later on. But first of all, let's have a look at the team list for this week and a couple of really interesting additions that were not reported in the media. So it looks like the medical team, the trainers, have done a really good job with Jacob Kiraz and Maxi King, who it was thought might be out for another week or so, but they come back into the starting 13. Braden Burns, unfortunately, after one of the great games he's played for us, is back on the injured list, which is a shame, and that injured list just doesn't seem to go down. But anyway, we've got Franklin Pele coming back too. He's on the bench, so a bit of weight there because our pack hasn't been looking overly big recently. Not that they haven't performed well. And Carl Oloapu, again, on the bench this weekend. Josh Reynolds is starting the game, at least at this stage. It may change closer to actual game time. Let's just see what happens. But on that point, we had this radical change last week, the week after we first started the experiment with Matt Burton at 7 and Kyle Flanagan at 6, and then we went to Josh Reynolds and Matt Burton with Kyle getting back to New South Wales Cup where he played hooker, and then we had Carl Oloapu coming on. Gentlemen, your thoughts on how that attack looked with that new halves combination?
I thought they played a bit of footy. They definitely moved the ball a fair bit, with... was it? Avarillo. Avarillo. He showed his wheels, scoring a couple of long-range tries, and I think obviously the Dragons were coming off the back of a game against the Roosters where it took a lot of energy, a very physical game. They were probably a little bit flat down in Wollongong, and that worked into the Bulldogs' hands. They played some expansive footy, and it worked.
Mm. Yeah, I think at the start of the year, I think there was a game at the start of the year, the second round or something. It might have been Melbourne, where they threw the ball around a lot. And I just think there's a lot of those players there, probably they'd like that sort of game. And as I said before, talking before we would come on here, I think that the more these kids stay on the paddock and get more experience, obviously, and they congeal together, I think it's going to be really beneficial for the team.
It's funny, isn't it? Every time we throw the ball around, 43 years later, they get called the entertainers. Isn't that amazing? That's your legacy, Steve Gearin.
Oh, me and a lot of other blokes. But, I think, it's just eyes up footy, and that's what we played many, many years ago. But I just thought at the start of the year, I thought, there might be a nice new era where they do play that game, and it is an exciting game, if you play it. Obviously, mistakes are a little bit more, percentages there, but I honestly thought that they played a little bit like that against St George, and not that St George probably played at their best, but I think, you create that in the other side if you're going all right, and I just thought, I think all the kids that are coming in and coming through, I think the more experience you get, the better I get.
Speaking of kids, Carl Oloapu finally makes his debut, comes off the bench. Interesting situation. At one stage, of course, there was he, Reynolds and Matty Burton in the team. Cameron Ciraldo's talked about that, but your thoughts on that, the emotion of it, and I want to hear also about your first grade debuts too and what that was like, Luke.
Yeah, well, the emotion of it, I mean, he's a big kid as well. I didn't realise, I hadn't seen a lot of him. I didn't realise how big he was, and that certainly helps on debut. I know I was probably about 70 kilos when I made my debut with a big, long, loose jumper.
Exactly.
Whereas he's quite a solid kid. I know his form, I've heard it's been up and down leading into this game, but I'm sure he'll be relieved to get it out of the way and certainly get a lot of confidence out of that game and the way they won. And he had some nice touches too. He did what he had to do. And I think with those three on the field, I think Josh obviously brings the energy. That's his go-to, right? He'll just bounce around and do what he does. Burton sort of steers the ship. You saw some good kicks and some real good decisions with the ball and when he runs the ball as well. And then I guess Carl's got to get in there and get his hands on the ball as well. So, it worked for him on the weekend. They just got to, I guess, keep that sort of style of footy up. And my debut, I think it was 1998 we actually played the Knights, was the premiers from the year before. And I remember talking to Trent Barrett before the game, and I was nervous and he said, "Mate, just don't stuff up." And I was, "Oh, thanks, mate." Like, that's just what I need to hear. But Yeah, for me, I remember it being a windy game, and Joey Johns was putting up torpedo bombs in Wollongong, and I was getting nowhere near him. And he said, "They're coming all day, you skinny little bugger." And for me, that was a welcome to NRL. You know, I'd played a fair bit of reserve grade and got comfortable, and playing against men was pretty confident. And for me, that was right. I know I need to really improve, and it was good and bad. Obviously, still very exciting being in my hometown as well, and going through all that, but playing against a team that I'd been on the lounge the year before cheering to win a grand final was pretty weird.
And you and Trent Barrett were the last remaining Steelers in the NRL.
Yes, me and Baz. Fitzy was filthy that he didn't keep playing because he's a very proud Steeler as well. We actually just had a reunion not long ago with some of the Steelers boys, and to be honest, they're some of my fondest memories as a young bloke coming into grade. I think coming into grade can be a really challenging time for a young bloke because it can be quite a bullying sort of atmosphere, if you know what I mean. You got to be very quiet. Back in those days, I clipped my legs, which just didn't happen. I remember the boys give me a hard time about that, but not in a bad way. They gave me the nickname, the General. Mick Cross, who's John Cross's younger brother. He's a big redhead front rower, and he called a team meeting one day and said, "Listen, we're calling this skinny young bloke the General." That's his nickname going forward. And it's changed my whole life. Like I said, for me, that they're some of my best footy memories because they're just so pure about. It wasn't a care in the world for me. It was just playing footy. So yeah, great memories.
Yeah, same as me. To be honest with you, I think the best advice I got was do the simple things well. It's pretty hard when you, as I said, you're 70 kilos, and I was playing next to a bloke named Peter Winchester a long, long time ago now. Mine was 1976. And I'd gone through under 23s, and they picked me in the early part of the next year, and Bullfrog thought I was ready to sort of have a bit of a go. Look, I think I played okay, but the nerves were just amazing, and also the size of the first grade, and it was such a massive jump from reserve grade to first grade. And I think I got hurt a little bit in that year, but it was the most exciting thing to actually make it there. But then I think that was the idea then, was that now I've been there and seen it. It's good. But getting back to the young fella, I actually thought he did pretty well out there. You know, I think he did probably everything he had to. He's probably a pretty talented player. He's got good feet and all that sort of stuff. But it's just right at the beginning now, and he's just got to continue to do those things that he's got to do. And I see a career for this kid. I think he's all right.
Look, I'm not going to do him a great injustice by putting him in the category of a Thurston or an Anasta yet, but I must say, you talk about him being good on his feet. There are players who get out there, even when they make their first grade debut, and they just look elusive, don't they? Yep. They just look like they give the defence headaches. Others are a little more flat, and that doesn't mean they can't play in other areas, but some kids have just got that little knack of making the defence think twice, and he looks like that kind of player. I don't know.
I think the nice thing too, I think the best thing for him will be, to keep the boom away from him. Let him just play his footy and do what he's got to do, because it takes a while. Luke will tell you, like, it just takes a while to actually get into the frame of this thing, and things just come at you in a different game. Like I remember we're playing Balmain, and it was like a pretty standard sort of game in a way. And then you play West, and they coming out. They want to just kill you, sort of thing, and it's scared. It's scary. It's one of those things. So you sort of, there's a whole range of things that happen there when you first start, but yeah, you just got to keep plugging along.
There were some nice stories out of this game as well. Players who probably, because of the circumstances around them more than anything else, have sometimes not had a chance to do their best on a regular basis. Corey Waddell, outstanding little try, great heads-up play, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, in terms of being able to think at the line. Braden Burns had a fantastic game, and it's such a shame. He would have loved to have followed that up, obviously.
Well, and injured as well. For him to play that, stay on the field and go through and play how he did, like, people got to understand when you're playing injured, it's even harder, and he held on and did a great job,
Jake Averillo, you've mentioned. Great chance to see him with. This is the thing, a little bit of space to move, and it's interesting, isn't it? Some people can look like they can't play, and I know keen observers of the game do sense this more than, say, casual observers, but a player can look a lot better when he or she has the right people around them. That goes for any team sport, doesn't it?
100%, and a bit of confidence as well, on the back of this win against the Dragons, they probably head up there this week with a bit more confidence, and they probably look to throw it around again and chance their hand and take a few risks. So the confidence would be high, you'd think.
I think Jake's. I think what I've seen of him, he looks like a bit of a winger to me. I know I'm not saying that, but he's just got a good speed. But I like what they're probably doing. They're switching around the centre and the winger sort of thing, and they gave him. That's how he got room, because he was playing out on the wing and got room to use his speed. So that was probably a good thing anyway. I don't know if it was done on purpose or not, but I think he's shown a bit anyway, Jake Everlow. I think there's something. He's had a lot of, mind you, he's had a lot of different changes in the team.
A lot of changes.
Halfback, and his position. So that doesn't probably help either. If you stay in the one position, you can actually get better at it, hopefully. But no, I know he's a good kid. I think he'll go well.
Darren Andrews gives us some stats on the games each week. I've got a couple of things he's given us for the Canberra game, but one stat that keeps coming up consistently is each week when we play a team, he often tells us how much the team has changed since we last played that team. And it's always interesting. The other teams had a lot more consistency about it in their lineup, particularly around their core players, than we have had in the last few years. That's a big deal.
Well, each week, whoever's playing, Luke Lazia, the same thing. You look at the sheet and they could be a totally different team than the one you played in the first round. The second round, they got all their players back. It's a different game, and you got all your good players. It's a different game altogether. It's
been a struggle for us this year. Short turnaround, Canberra, Friday, 6 p.m, Magic Round. They're on the improve. We'll talk a bit about Magic Round more generally later, but Canberra, they've won 3 straight now, and in fact, would you believe they've won 6 straight against Canterbury, which I must admit I had overlooked. It didn't feel that way, but that's how. The last time we beat them was round 9 in 2017, so formidable team, Canberra, and riding a lot of emotion at the moment. But Gus Gould said once that emotion can be a great motivator, but can also drain you after a while as well. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. The whole Jack Whiten thing, I personally think that they'll probably use that, and I think Jack will as well, to finish this year strong. So I think the Raiders, like you said, it can be dangerous. You can use it when it's close to a match and it all comes at once. It can be great for the game. But then, as you said, to back it up the next week and try and – you're not going to play every week on that emotion. But I think it's certainly a danger game. As you said, they've won 3 on the trot. They're a dangerous team. When they play footy, the Raiders, I feel like I enjoy watching the Raiders play because they can move the ball a lot. They've got some big guys with offloads. They can be a really dangerous side, so it's a tricky game for the Dogs.
And they're a bogey team, for sure. And it could go either way this week.
And even though we've got a couple of big bodies back, as I said, Pele and Max King, they are a tough pack to get on top of. So that'll be a big factor in the game, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a good side. They've got a lot of football in them, and when they're on song, they've got a few mistakes in them too. And I think that's where Canterbury got to probably do something about that. But it's going to be a funny game. I think we could go anywhere. So interesting.
Well, before we finish up and move on to the next segment, I should also mention, particularly given Steve played in an era of low-scoring grand finals, that our Harvey Norman's women's premiership team lost the grand final to Mounties last weekend, but only by 1-0. A field goal in the 68th minute. Quite a remarkable performance, and well done to Tilly Power for kicking that field goal. It was an intense game of rugby league. Interesting, isn't it, to have a game like we have had a 1-0 scoreline before in the NRL way back when. I think it was a Kenny Wilson field goal.
Yeah, it
for
was
Newtown.
Kenny Wilson.
But interesting that at this day and age, I know the weather probably wasn't conducive to it, but gee, that's an intense game of footy.
I had to do a double take when I saw the score because I was checking the junior rep games and I saw that game 1-0 and I was like, this can't be right. I looked into it and sure enough, like you said, the weather didn't help. But I heard it was actually a really good game of footy as well, and that they were just both defending so well and that both teams weren't really looking to take a risk with the ball. And that's probably why that game ended up like it did. Yeah.
The A-League Women's Grand Final was on the same weekend and had a higher score. Just as a comparison.
They're playing some good footy, the girls.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And most of them will go and play NRLW now.
Absolutely,
and in a couple of years, it'll be a Bulldogs NRLW team, which is great. We're looking forward to that, and the club's very much getting behind putting an NRLW team on the field. And we will see an expanded competition anyway this year, and we're very much looking forward to that. This is Bulldogs Unleashed with Steve Gearin and Luke Patten. When we come back, we'll have a look at some of the big issues that are running around the game at the moment.
G'day, I'm Matt Burton from the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs and I play 5'8". It's great that the Bulldogs have partnered up with Reclaim the Game. I think the fans see a lot of betting apps and stuff all over social media, and it encourages them to do it. Sometimes you can fall into the trap of betting too much, and I think it's a big issue in Australia, and I think the more we talk about it and get on top of it, the better. Sometimes it gets out of hand for people and becomes an actual problem, so I think it's just good to enjoy the game and enjoy every moment. If it's becoming a big problem, maybe have a look at it from the outside and take a step back and think about your choices before you're doing it, and just enjoy the game for what it is. I think it's important that fans can reclaim the game and just be involved in every moment on the field instead of worrying about your multi or something like that. Don't let a bet take you away from the match. Reclaim the game and be gamble aware.
This week's headlines.
Welcome back to Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game. Our guests this week are Steve Gearin and Luke Patten, and we're going to talk about some of the issues that are going on today in rugby league, one of which is a little close to home because this week Josh Reynolds did apologise for what he said to the referee in the game against the Dragons on the weekend. It was an awkward and unfortunately an untimely incident because we had a referee attacked in another form of the game at suburban level, which did draw a lot of attention to our relationship with refs. But at any point in the game, we'll start with Luke because obviously you've had a lot to do with the bunker and match review in your post-playing career. Arguing with the referee, is there any value to it other than just getting it off your chest?
No, not really. You're never going to win. My dad always said to me early on that they're not going to change their decision, so why bother arguing? Like you said, I guess I've been lucky enough to be on a number of different sides, not just as a player. I worked with the refs and the bunker for 6 years. Got to know the refs really well, got to see it from their side of things. And also being a dad now with two young boys, when I go and watch junior footy, I'm very aware of how people talk to the referee. I make sure all my team shake hands with the ref, make sure I go and say hello, make sure they're feeling comfortable. And I just think as a game, we could do better. I still think we do pretty well, but I still think we could do better than what we're doing. And I think for Josh, I think everyone knows that the way he plays with his emotion, he's hard on the sleeve type player, and that situation sort of blew up. I was surprised to see the reaction from Grant Atkins, who, funnily enough, his dad played NRL. So he comes from a footy background. I thought at the time that he was going to sin bin him. I thought it must have been pretty bad what he'd said. It ends up that Josh gets a $1,000 fine for what happened, and I support that we should be treating the refs the right way in a respectful manner, and I think that's probably fair enough, a punishment for Josh. And as you said, he's apologised, and we all just move on.
Yeah, look, they're doing a job, for sure. And over the years, obviously there wasn't the bunker and all that sort of stuff when I was playing, and the referee had 100% apart from the linesmen to make a decision. Look, the word that he's using, bullshit, it's like a 50-50 thing in a way, but you've really got to consider the respect in the whole thing. This bloke's doing his job, and regardless of the situation, it is a line ball to me a little bit, but then you look at the other way. If you're going to let that each week, when a decision happens, you can't let go. So
there's still an integrity question
Absolutely.
there, isn't there? I mean, he's not directly accusing the ref of anything but a mistake, but the suggestion is that it's not that. But and I don't think Josh meant it in that way, but he understands that it sounded like that.
Well, he's come back and said sorry and all that sort of stuff, and that's obviously what he has to do anyway. But
even on a lesser scale, now we all know famously. Great players like Cameron Smith, as captains in their role, have spoken to refs and talked about decisions over the years in a much more polite manner. But the interesting thing there, and I've talked about this to a lot of athletes over the years in team sports, and there is a theory, and I know in the soccer world there's certainly a theory that if you, as a captain, represent yourself politely to a referee about the way they're ruling some part of the game, then it may have, if not on that call, it may have a residual effect for the rest of the game or even in future that can perhaps help you. I don't subscribe to that theory. I'm just relaying what they're saying. Again, Luke, is that really going to have any difference at all?
I think there's a little bit to that, Bill. I know where I used to stand as a fullback. Sometimes I'd be close to the referee. I'd say a few things. I'd say knock on there or something. He might agree and call a knock on. I'd say great call, And you plant the seed, right? That's part of, I guess, as a player, understanding how it works. You know, as you said, you say hello, you be polite, respectful, you plant a few seeds, you give him a bit of a pat on the back, or you say he owes us one here, he's given us a couple of tough calls. That's all part of what you do as a player. You plant the seed and you might get a call 50, 60 minutes later, and, it's because of what's happened before maybe. But at the end of the day, the referees are just calling it how they see it. I know everyone likes to say that it all works out in the end in the game. It doesn't always work out, but that's playing sport. Some things, and as I tell my two boys, some things go wrong, and that's just the way it is. You got to deal with it. It's how you adapt and react, and not, just kick stones and carry on about it. It's how you react and get on with it.
Yeah, it's your manner, isn't it? And how you talk to the referee. It's pretty important. And like the Cameron Smiths, they're smart guys, and they can speak.
And they're always respectful.
Absolutely. They got all that, so they get their message across, whatever that might be. But, definitely about the manner, like in our day, it's, there's all sorts of stuff going on about the referee.
I wanted to talk about that because back in your day, Steve, clearly there were some big personality referees. I mean, Greg Hartley, his nickname was Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he was a referee. Bill Harrigan, a bit further on, of course, there are others, and they all had personalities. And, of course, whoever's team lost the penalty count accused them of being biased or whatever. That goes on all the time. But those referees use their judgment of the game, their intuition, a lot more perhaps than the refs today do. They have a lot of technology on their side. But I wonder how much sometimes that affects their ability to use their intuition, to use their sense of when a player is trying to work a 50-50 situation. As Graham Annesley has admitted this year, there are so many of those calls in a game, particularly in the play of the balls.
Well, it's the technology now that's part of the decision-making process, isn't it? Out there, the referees now, obviously, if it's cut and dry, it's okay. But if there's anything cloudy in it, well, they're going to go to the bunker. They've got to, because that's the technology in everything that we do. So
there's still a lot of areas like that play the ball, the six agains, where the bunker isn't involved.
Well, that's right.
And that's where the refs got to
they've got to run with their gut and they've got to run with what they see.
Yeah.
I'll say this, though. How many people have you spoken to about the footy this year and said, geez, the footy's great?
Yeah, absolutely.
The footy has been great
really
this
close,
year, right?
It's great.
Yeah.
Footy's never been faster. It's never been harder. It annoys me that people
Close
say
games.
it's soft. There's nothing about rugby league at any level that is soft. It's never soft. The footy has been great, and the speed of the game means that they've got to make their decisions quicker and quicker and quicker. And,
Absolutely.
We're more than happy to give them a hard time when they get it wrong, but how many decisions they get right as well? So you got to look at both sides of it, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of, controversy this year, like as far as the referees are concerned. Like a lot. I haven't seen much at all. I think they probably get it right most of the time, to be honest with you. So
and
close games too.
And like we said, even if there are, let's just say 50-50 calls that might go against how you feel as a fan, as long as there's a balance of those decisions in a game. And we're not expecting that to be quantified in any way. The referee doesn't have a little piece of paper where they're saying, well, hang on, I gave that 50-50 call to them. I've got one owing to the other. It doesn't work that way. But if you feel like the game's gone that way, you're happy, even if there are a couple of calls you don't agree with.
Yeah, the referees are human too. Like, not that they try and even the game out, but in their own mind, if they're going 5 or 6 penalties in a row to one side, they're thinking to themselves like, is this other crowd going
and it's
that bad?
Maybe a team deserves to get penalised 5 times in a row because they're just getting rolled over so many times.
Just saying, you're human too, like your human element sort of tells you, like, am I getting this right? like I'm penalising this crowd every time. Are they going that bad? But
there's more and more pressure now as well when we have multiple penalties then to sin bin. That comes into play as well, and then that has a huge effect on the game as well.
Massive,
So there's so much pressure on them. And like you said, some teams are just on the back foot the whole game, right?
Yeah.
And they're just doing their best to hang on. Yeah. So they do deserve to be penalised. So it can be, as a fan as well, you're never going to get it right because fans, as we know, are biased and they think that they're always calls go against their team. That's just the way footy is.
Sure, it is.
Yeah.
I do love the sin bin for repeated infringements, though. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it works.
There
needs to be a punishment there. That's if you're going to keep
doing it, keep doing something that's wrong. Well, it's like being in school, isn't it?
And as Ivan Cleary pointed out, he made a comment after the game against the Tigers this weekend, and it was related to the hip drop tackle and the adjudication of that. But he did qualify his comment by saying he felt for the referees. We've got to remember that there are and quite often the NRL quite laughably says, we're not changing the rules, we're just adjusting a few interpretations of the rules. Okay, whichever way you want to put it. The referee has then got to interpret things differently, haven't they? So the referees are always dealing with changing circumstances and things they're cracking down on in the game. And I know it's their job, they're professional, but that's still something they've got to work with.
Absolutely, and it's the same with the bunker, Bill. Like the bunker was brought in to deal with try-scoring situations and making other decisions. Now I would say most of the decisions they make are foul play and incidents like that. So I think everyone has got more on their plate now, referees, bunker, to deal with. And I certainly know from a match review side of things, sometimes it takes us a significant amount of time to reach a decision, and the people in front of us, the refs and the bunker, only have a limited time. So it can be tricky for them to make calls as well on the go. So, yeah, there's a multitude of things that go into it, I guess.
And even when you see the replay on the screen, sometimes you think the bunker's just ruled that he or she touched that ball. I don't see that. You still get two people looking at the same thing and they will disagree on what they're saying.
Human element.
Yeah. I actually did it on the weekend. I might have been wrong, but I thought Tavita Fangai Jr. actually didn't touch the ball. I thought his arm went over it, but the bunker ruled that he did. And maybe he did. I'm not saying I'm right. It just didn't look like it to me. It's funny, isn't it? I think you've got to bear that in mind. Occasionally when you're watching the team and you're watching your team, you can be wrong. Let's talk about something much more positive. Taking the game to regional areas. We're seeing games at Wagga Wagga, Bathurst, Mudgee. We're going to Bundaberg, the Bulldogs, which is a great round of rugby league. And I guess you can overdo these things, but as a country boy myself, grew up in a small town. In fact, my hometown had a pre-season game at Maruya this week and this year, and the Bulldogs were one of the teams that played there with the Raiders, funnily enough. But I think it's wonderful, but I guess it's something you can overdo.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? You know, I don't know what would have happened 40 years ago if we had a home game at Belmore here against Parramatta or Balmain or wherever, and all of a sudden we're out at Broken Hill to play. I don't know how that.
What, you're going to be riding in the streets?
I don't know how fans are going with that one, but I think to promote the game and everything, I think, but not to overdo it. You know, maybe one or two games top. Because I think you base your supporters are all the people that are local and that can come to the game, and they're your people, you know, that you've got to look after probably pretty foremost than anything else. But at the same instance, you've got to promote the game and out in the country areas there. You know, I actually was out at Mudgee last year, and the Manly are with Mudgee and all that. It was a wonderful situation out there, great support. For rugby league, obviously Manly, but and all the Manly boys did a really good job after the thing. They did the whole thing really well, the PR side of things. So I think that's a good and having an allegiance to maybe a country town, a certain club.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing. But then the next year maybe have another allegiance to maybe another town or whatever. If you're going to do it, we'll just make sure everyone gets a bit of a go. But you still got to have the facilities and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think it's a great idea. I think how many kids out in country areas get to go and see their stars in the flesh, get a signature. I would imagine my boys going to a game and being amazed to see their stars, and then that might give them the dream in the future of playing NRL. Also, the thing that came into my head then was the flip side to that is you're giving up a home ground advantage. At the end of the day, where teams are trying to win games to get into the finals, like where does it stop, I guess? But I think it's still great for the game. I love seeing it on TV when they're out in regional areas and the ground's packed and people having a great time. I think
maybe early in the season, it's probably a better time. Like, you know, when it comes to the back end, your home ground's pretty important, you know, when you're playing if it's a close, you know, the team's close to you or whatever. Maybe like in the early parts or the middle section. But I reckon after that, you've got to look after your loyal supporters around the area.
That's an interesting point. On the subject of that, Magic Round this weekend, all the games at Suncorp, and the Bulldogs actually get a good look at it because the game's on Friday. I don't know if I'd want to be playing on Sunday, but the surface has got rugby on it as well, and we know what rugby scrums do to footy grounds. But anyway, 8 matches in 3 days, and but the atmosphere, though, that is quite special. Suncorp Stadium,
it's
mostly packed.
It's one of the best grounds to play at, I think, certainly in Australia. You know, it's one of those grounds where you're happy to give up playing at, you know, maybe Homebush if you're playing at Suncorp. You know, it's going to be a dry track. There'll be a decent crowd there. You're excited to go. I played in the Magic round over in the Super League actually, and we actually got to play at Man City's home ground. And the fans love it. They all go and party. It's a different sort of vibe because you can go and see all the other teams, and I certainly know people that are going up for Magic round and make a weekend of it. And I think it's a good thing for the game. I think everyone enjoys it, and I'm sure the footy will live up to this good standard as well. So only a good thing.
Yeah, great idea. I think it's great. And people get to sort of meet other people and whatever, and all the players are there. You can and you might even switch a team. Like anything since it happens.
That's
I think it's a really good idea.
Everyone's got a second favourite team, haven't they? Well, most people do anyway, and that can change during the weekend as well.
Yeah.
If your own team's already played, you hang out and watch
or
the
your
other
grandfather
games.
followed a team or whatever, or whatever.
And it's a lot less pressure. You don't suffer as much if you lose with your second and third teams.
It's great for Brisbane, put it that way.
Well, especially the Dolphins at the moment, right? I feel like everyone's really
right
everyone
behind
in
them,
the
aren't
game is right behind them. They're enjoying seeing
good
them
on you.
be successful.
Absolutely.
The Warriors is another team.
The
a lot
Warriors
of
are
people
another
like.
one. Yeah.
I like the Gold Coast because I don't know. They've had some good years, but I like to see them do well.
It's an even comp. It's anyone can beat anyone by the look of it at the moment,
except when they're playing us. That's basically the rule.
Yeah, but I think as the time goes on, and Luke will say, as the comp goes on, normally the best rise, when you're getting with about 4 or 5 games to go and you're in position, you're starting to think of bigger things ahead, and the quality normally rises to the top. You know what you got to do. So,
Steve Gearin, Luke Patten, Unleashed. When we come back, we'll go in the sheds.
Let's go in the sheds.
This is Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game. And our guests this week are Luke Patten and Steve Gearin. We're going to get onto some history pretty soon. But in the meantime, let's go in the sheds to find out just how intimate these guys are with rugby league at this stage of their lives. And we know Luke Patten's very intimate with it because, well, apart from being involved with the bunker, you're now involved with match review. And I think when we see the refs go on report, we know that the match review is going to have a look at that. But how much other stuff do you look at? How does the match review work these days, Luke?
Yeah, so I guess to start off with, there's 5 guys on the match review. It's not just me making the decisions, but there's former ref Steve Clark, former coach Stewie Raper, Michael Hodgson, former player, former Bulldog, and Anthony Quinn used to play for the Storm, played Origin, and myself. So 3 former players, ex-coach, ex-ref. So the process each week is we get allocated games to watch. So I usually do both games on a Friday night. I'll sit there. So there's a room off to the sides of the bunker. I'll watch the game. We have all the angles. We can sit there, rewind, change angles. It's a great way to watch footy, actually, because you don't miss the thing. You can hear the commentary. That's another thing I get asked. So back in the bunker, back in the day when you were making decisions, you didn't hear any commentary because you didn't want to be swayed.
Sure.
Whereas with the match review, you can hear the commentators go, "Oh, what happened in the background there?" Or whatever. So it kind of sometimes helps because they might see something and you go, "Oh, I'll go back and check that."
Right.
And then so I might do a game and there's 20 things I've clipped. I'll just tag them all and say head high tackle, hip drop, crusher. And I'll tag them and then they all get sent to everyone's iPads and they can be sitting there at home watching it or review it in the morning. I'll give my initial thoughts on what I think. I think this is fine because of this reason. I think this is a charge for this reason. And then we meet in the morning, usually early in the morning the next day, and we'll just go over what we need to talk about and we'll nut it out, basically. So there's a library of incidents from previous years that we can say, oh, listen, I think this one is similar to the one that we had last year, and we can bring all that footage up on and we all watch it at the same time, and then we basically nut it out. So there's a fair bit that goes to it, and some meetings can go for a long time, and that's why I said earlier that it can take us an hour to get to. We might discuss something and go, oh, let's move on and we'll do something else. We'll come back to that, and we'll discuss it again at the end. So there's a lot of time, and there's a lot of things cleared as well. Like we might capture, like as I said, 20 or 30 incidents, and we've cleared them in the game. Usually because there's not enough force or actions aren't careless, and there might be 4 or 5 hip drops in a game that aren't hip drops. Blokes just land on people's legs. So there's a lot of stuff, and then that at the end of the week there might be 200 incidents, and that all gets sent out to the club so they can see what we've looked at, what we reviewed, and what we thought of each incident. So, and then we get to where clubs have the option. So at the end of the day, again, we're the first step in the process. We give you our thoughts, and then the clubs can challenge what we think and go to judiciary and argue their case. So I go to the judiciary. I sort of don't have to do anything in that situation. I'm just there to observe, hear each side's argument, and then I guess I pass on the thoughts of what happens to the rest of the committee members from there, and we just we live and learn. So there's a bit that goes into it. I was a bit unsure when I first joined. This is my 4th year now. I was a bit unsure about it, but I actually find it really stimulating, interesting. Obviously, it keeps me involved in football, and I enjoy talking to people about certain things. I'm not this kind of person, or the committee's not where we love charging people or we get a bonus for a charge. And I'm probably the opposite. I always like to give the players the benefit of the doubt in situations. I certainly don't like seeing players miss games, and we've just got to treat each incident on its merits. At the end of the day, there's rules. It's no different to a referee where they can always go back on the rules. It's the same with us. We have certain parameters that, if they tick each box and we don't charge it, then someone's going to ask a question why. Yeah. Clubs can, I'm open to questions from clubs if they want a bit of clarity on things, and I think that's important that we are accountable for the decisions as well. So, yeah. Yeah,
because coaches don't always come out defending their own players' actions. Quite often they do say, I can't believe we didn't get a call for that. And so it works both ways. Yeah. Listening to all that, Steve Gearin, and going back to your playing days and the way the game was adjudicated.
It would have been busy.
Before we go back, that's a long way back. Before we go back, I think it's a wonderful idea they got ex-players doing this thing, because there's that reality part of it. They've been involved with the game. And someone like Luke, he's not too far out of the game. He's up to date with what's going to happen. I just think that's the secret to it all, to have these people that actually played recently to a point, but also, and keen to actually break it down, and because it makes the game better.
It's a pretty clever player who can actually make a deliberate contact look accidental, isn't it? Which is why I come back to that word intuition. It comes back to why an ex-player will kind of know when a contact has been incidental.
Well, he's gonna. We've spoken about this. He knows it. He knows what's happened there. He's gonna go the benefit of the doubt to the player. Like, let's not overshoot this whole thing. Give him a little bit of. It's probably coming from the 40 years ago, whatever. Blokes were just sent off, and that was it. There was no 10 minutes in the bin and everything. You're gone. I remember playing one day. I think there was 9 against 10 at Redfern Oval. I think I was playing. It might have been the Charity Shield or something. I was playing for St George. Anyway, all of a sudden there's 10 on 9 in this game at Redfern Oval. There's blokes getting sent off left, right, and centre. It was Mario.
A lot of space for a winger.
Well, it was like touch. It was great. I got a bit of ball. Yeah, it was good. It was me and Slippery. That was about it. Really, it was quite funny.
He was quick.
But it was quite a funny game. But they just get sent off. Whereas now they got to.
Do you remember Wack used to say? I'm pretty sure Wack had that theory a long way back. Warren Ryan were talking about that the game would be better if it was 9 on 9 or 10 on 10. Do you remember that theory? Anyway, that didn't go anywhere. But you sometimes think about it when you see it's probably a bit more extreme than people would want. But anyway, certainly enable us to have more players at a high level in the game if you're going to expand. Anyway, just a thought. When you look at the game today, apart from the adjudication side of it, things like match review, the technology, what do you see, Steve, when you think about the way you played and has much changed? What do you like and dislike?
I think the game that I played, and I played with St George, and I was there for the 2 years. It was a lot of eyes up footy. Like we threw the ball around, but you had the players, Mm-hmm. And I think that I always think, it's the champion team's always going to beat the team of champions, I think the teams that I play with, particularly in 79 and 80 with Canterbury, it was a team that was sort of based on the fact that, okay, we could score more points than them sort of thing. And so that's what created the entertainer thing. But we had a lot of ball players, and I think that the game was exciting that way. And as I said, I thought Canterbury played a little bit like that in the second round. It was just really good to watch. But to play that, you got to just be, your hands have got to be, and you got to be in position, and you really know what you're doing. And I think
you got to be fit.
Well, the other thing you got to do is actually you got to think about making ground too, like stepping the bloke and then looking at the same time. And it's a little bit like touch footy, but it's not, because it's a game that's exciting too to be involved in. And with St George, it was a bit the same. You're playing next to blokes like Steve Rogers and Slippy Morris and the Johnsons and all those blokes, and they're all attacking players. we will just score tries. Okay, well, they might get a try, an easy try, but we'll score a couple, and it doesn't matter where you're going. One other point I'll make about the entertainers too is that we had a bloke like Steve Mortimer, who was probably the best player I've ever played with, along with Chris, his brother. But we could be 20 metres out, and he'd look, and we'd all sort of look like that, and all of a sudden the ball's going to come to me, and so I'm going to just split out, and it doesn't matter if it was first, second, or third tackle, and that's what made it exciting. But there's always a gamble, as we know, with that sort of stuff. But at the same time, if you practice it and play it, you get better at it. And okay, if you want to be a bit more standard and have the first two up and all that sort of stuff, and then let the thing go because it's on out there because the bloke there's not quite in position or whatever. But you need a bloke like Mortimer to actually think about that. And a lot of these blokes are out there, like Penrith play a little bit like that. There's a lot of teams that do, but they're normally in front by a bit and they throw their arm a little bit. But I think the game can be played like that more regularly. I think that's where St George actually got booed a bit. I think they just hit it up, and Canterbury knew what they were doing, and then started to throw the ball.
Is there still room for the smaller player in rugby league?
Well, that just made me think of Brent Sherwin, to be honest. Like he's a player that would have thrived in that era. Like I know it's the same thing. He'd give you and he'd be like, he put a kick across field from 28, you know what I mean? And he was the same sort of player. Whereas I think now, everyone talks about completion rates and the game at times is very predictable. Even though, don't get me wrong, sometimes I love seeing a physical defense get on top type game. I think I do miss that a little bit where, back in the day we used to see teams really get teams on their line and beat them up and there would be a low scoring game. I don't think we see that as much these days. But yeah, it's certainly it's such a juggle on what players do what at what times, I guess.
And they're a bit nervous. Everyone's a bit nervous, obviously, about dropping the ball, But I think that, like in your pre-season and all that sort of stuff, they're just basic skills that, you've just got to practice and do it well. It's like anything, tackling well or whatever. And technique is the most significant thing now, particularly in tackling and all that sort of stuff. And given that we've got a lot of blokes who are actually not real well, and a lot of it's really that maybe bad technique. If we look back 40, 50 years, tackling, not just getting hit like or someone punching in the head, it's more the technique going into tackle or, not preserving yourself when you're there and whatever it might be. There's all that into play now.
I've had this discussion with other people who've played other team sports, but there is a huge emphasis these days on finding the athlete, finding the body and turning that into whatever in your field of sport, right? And there are some sports, as we know, for example, basketball and AFL, that quite often compete at a certain level of junior development for that body because they both value the height and the athleticism at that age. And there are many other comparisons. What I'm getting at is with this, we don't rugby league to be generic in the sense that we want players who don't have the body, but they have that skill and intuition. You see sometimes we often remark about, he or she looks like an old-fashioned footy player. In other words, they might not have that amazing physique, but they have amazing skill and durability, and as you said, Steve, technique, particularly when it comes to defence. Look at they often say it about Jake Trbojevic.
100%, yeah.
I watched the kid grow up because he went to school with my daughter, and he's a terrific young bloke, but he is an old-fashioned footy player. We don't want to lose those guys from the game. I'm not saying he doesn't have a good physique, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't want to look like Mr. Universe all the time. So it's I don't know. I hope that's not lost to the game.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because you would say now that most of them are athletes, fantastic athletes before they're footballers, really, wouldn't you?
But if they can't catch a ball...
Well, they can't read a short side. There's so many things that go into it, right? Like being able to see a short side where you've got numbers or, it's a marker who is not going to chase. There's so many little things that footballers get. And then I guess what you're saying, Bill, is that if you get athletes and it's hard to teach all that. Well, it's almost impossible to teach all that stuff. You learn that on the job over years and years until you get where you are. So, you love seeing. And Cody Walker's probably one of those guys when you see he takes risks. He plays footy, He'll see a short side and take it on and not fear if he makes a mistake. And everyone sort of says that about him. He's a footballer, And
rugby league, actually, if you play the game, you've got to have a certain element of courage to actually go out there, And as a smaller bloke, having Chris Mortimer next to me. I only made one tackle a game, so it was pretty handy that way. So it was really good.
Well, that's another good
He
component.
just said, "You score the tries, kick the goals, and we'll get out later on."
Good deal.
It's a great deal for me. Yeah, it was under that. And then I went to St George. I had Mick Booty next to me, so it was the same deal. So I was very fortunate over those times, but I was a little bit like that. I think it was horse for the courses a little bit, but I think in today's game, you've got to. I think you look at a bloke like Walker from the Roosters, a great little player, but he's getting bashed up a bit, and with all that too, how's his confidence, and he looks like a very courageous player and all that sort of stuff, but it starts to wear, I reckon, and unless you're protected, a la myself and many others in my era, in a way, how long are you going to survive, So there's a number of things, personal things that I think you got to think about when you're smaller, I suppose.
Dog Days coming up with Luke Patten and Steve Gearin on Bulldogs Unleashed.
Let's talk about the dog days.
Time to go back to the good old days on Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game with Steve Gearin and Luke Patten, and there are some good old days shared by these guys, let me tell you. Firstly, Steve Gearin. The 1980 Grand Final, of course, is arguably the most iconic for the Bulldogs, and we've won plenty since then. But it was a breakthrough after a long drought, and that particular team, as we've discussed with the Entertainers, very famous team. Steve, firstly, how many times have you had to talk about that try in 43 years? And secondly, the fact that you've had to talk about it for 43 years, how has that changed your life?
Oh, it's pretty much shaped it, really, It's but what a nice shaping, I think you're lucky in sport if you're identified or you're spoken to or whatever, and something good comes up. There's a lot of people that they're not remembered for something, whatever. And my career sort of dwindled out at the end, but highlighted pretty much by that. And I just think it's the respect I've got to show to the actual day itself too. Okay, and I had a good day and did all the things I had to do, kicked all the goals and scored a nice try at the end and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, it's the respect when someone who I've never met before, I've got to give it the respect what they thought of the day or whatever they thought of what happened. So I do, and for Canterbury, I remember Peter Moore always saying that to me. He said, I don't know whether you're going to ever top this thing, I said, you're pretty right, Bullfrog. So it was sort of, it's been wonderful. It's just been funny stories as being a teacher and that you get, and I've taught kindergarten and cottage at St Luke's Grammar over the last 25 years, been a great school and everything. But I have some 6-year-old kid come up to me and say, "Oh, Mr. G, when are you coming back to play again?" Like it's quite funny because on Google and all that.
Yeah, on Google. That's how they know.
Their parents show them stuff. This is the teacher you got today and all that. But it sort of brings you back into today's world too.
Yeah.
So in a way, something very good that did happen to me, it's brought back in a really positive sense. I need to do that right.
Yeah.
So I have a responsibility to history and to the club and to everything else to do that right. And it's always thanks very much, It's thanks and to continue the humbleness that had to be for 43 years ago. Yeah.
Well, it's almost not. It's not like it's your memory anymore, right? It's everyone else's. Really, to be fair, because it's like one of those "where were you" moments, right? Yeah. And that's what everyone has their own memory of it, and they probably want to share it with you.
It's funny, Luke. Everyone says in the Sheridan stand, like anyone.
So there were 600,000 people at the SCG that day.
They were always in the Sheridan, because they were right in front of the ball. When I caught the ball, and so you sort of. Oh, look, it's just wonderful. Yeah, it's shaped my life. It's been great.
What did you know of that tradition when you joined the Bulldogs? How much a part of the fabric of the club was it in those days? And we're going back now, sort of midway, aren't we, really? Late 90s?
Pretty much.
Yeah, listen, I grew up, I wasn't a Bulldogs fan growing up. I enjoyed watching the Raiders with Mal Meninga, Laurie Daly, Eels at different times with Sterlo. I think I chopped and changed teams a little bit, and then being from Wollongong when the Steelers came in. I certainly wasn't a Bulldogs fan, although I was aware they were a successful club. And then probably weirdly for me, at the Dragons, played that grand final in 99 and then had a pretty ordinary year after that. Probably a number of reasons led to that. I sort of got to the stage where I was almost going to retire from footy. I thought, I was seeing my mates go and do their works and having the weekends off, and I was having quite a stressful job. I thought, I'm just going to give it all away. And then Mum and Dad sort of said, why don't you give it one more go? And I had two options. I had the Storm or the Bulldogs. And I didn't want to go to Melbourne. So I came up and I remember speaking to Folksy in his office. I walked in and I decided that I wanted to give it a crack. And I said to him, I just want to focus on my footy. I want to train hard and I want to, give it a good crack. And he goes, well, you've come to the right club. And, it literally changed my whole life. Like I had no idea what I was in for. That the first few months, I was still driving up from Wollongong, and I've told the story where I'd have to pull over on the side of the road where I couldn't hold the steering wheel because I couldn't hold my arms up. The training was that hard, and I was so glad that I had the 1 year under Billy Johnson here. I look back at it now and think it was basically torture, and it was if you can get through it, you can get through anything. And it shaped my whole life. I literally, whatever situation I'm in my life now, I think I can do it because I've had that much confidence from going through that. It's hard to try and pass that stuff on to your sons, and it's almost like you have to go through that to get that confidence. So, but for me, best decision ever made in my life, to be honest. Yeah, I had to grow up. Always say I was, I played NRL before I came here. I became an NRL player when I came to this club. So, great memories.
That is interesting, and it comes up a lot with the famous Bulldog sides, is that depth of preparation, the pre-season, and also basically the work that goes into it. That's a pretty good life lesson too.
We had Dave Cooper and Dave Irvine. Like they were just unbelievable trainers at that time. Dave Irvine was a world sprint champion, and Bullfrog got him in here, and Dave Cooper was just outstanding in the fitness area. And I think a lot of that too, we played the footy because we're so fit, weren't big, but we're quick and caused a lot of havoc to everyone, So those makes a lot of difference when you've got good trainers and stuff.
Great timing for you, really, when you talk about that signing up, because it wasn't too long before the Bulldogs had assembled, as it turned out illegally, in 2002, an amazing team. But then when that was sort of sorted out in a couple of years, the premiership came, and that was an incredible period, those 4 years or so that you speak of, from 2000 through to 2004. That's 5 years, isn't it? But it was a remarkable period for the club. A lot happened. And how much did that shape you as well, Luke, for future years?
Yeah, it definitely shapes you, gives you that resilience. I don't think I was a very resilient player or person before I came to the club, and it was probably because I had a great childhood. I had nothing bad that I went through to sort of shape me. It's weird that when you think about it, and then you come to the club. I think when you're talking about 04, you have to talk about all those years leading up to it, because when I first came, they had blokes like Pricey, Reardon, Polamauna, the Hughes boys, all these guys, Darren Britt, like these guys. When I first came, I was scared to let them down. Craig Polamauna was my first trainer that I trained with in the gym, and he just stood there and counted my reps, and he was hard on me, but he was also fair by saying, come on, just keep going, instead of just going, come on, mate, do it. He was encouraging. And that's something that really stuck with me, that those older guys, I think all that younger crew that came through, like Thurston, Sonny, Rennie, all those guys that came through, they got a taste of that, and they took what they needed out of all those older guys. So in a weird kind of way, those older guys contributed so much to that outcome in 04. It wasn't just because we were a great group of guys, great group of footballers. It was everything that we'd learnt. And they put their stamp on that 04 team, and that's what happened out of that. So it's pretty cool when you look at it that way. And
Steve, that early 80s team, and I'll get on to where you bounced back to the Bulldogs in a minute, but just looking at that 1979-80 situation there, and then, of course, into the early 80s. That team was not just a great team to watch. We know them as the entertainers, but I remember as a fan, they had a lot of integrity too. And you've actually started writing a book about integrity, about being a good bloke, which I find interesting. And I wonder how much, I know you've been a school teacher for a long time as well, and that's important, but I wonder how much of that book and your idea to write it was born out of that kinship, the teamwork, and all those important elements.
Yeah, the team itself, we obviously not everyone's going to get on with everyone, but it really was a champion team in the sense of we really, when we got on the field, we knew exactly what everyone was going to do. And it was once again, it was Bullfrog again, and his vision, to get a lot of people together, and that team sort of stayed together for a while, not a long time. But it was in that short space of time. It just clicked into gear, and it was just an amazing time, And when I'm going through all those things with with football and then into school teaching and that, I sat down. I had a double hip a number of years ago now, and for a winger, I don't know how that happened, but anyway, that's another story. But
You were too fast.
I don't think so. But I sat down and because I'd been teaching boys for about 40 odd years, I started to write. I've never been a writer. Anyway, but I started writing. All of a sudden, I've got these pages of writing about boys and the whole idea was what a little bloke, how you can get a little bloke, in his formative years up to a good bloke in his mid-20s type of thing. And it came up in the fact that this stranger came in the pub and said to me one day, "Oh, geez, your two boys are good blokes." And I thought, what makes a good bloke? What makes someone tell you you're a good bloke? And, we all know, being Australian and all that, it's one of the biggest raps you can ever get if you're saying, "Oh, geez, he's a good bloke." When you meet someone, and it can be 5 minutes, it could be you know him for, years, but he just continually, and he's not perfect, but he's continually trying to be, understand and whatever, and so I started to write formative years and puberty years, adolescent years and young man years, and how can you get your son, at such an early point, and how do you know he's going to be, and it's a work in progress, but it's just all these things, and it mainly comes through, you've got your people, your female and your male role models are so significant through that course of time, but watching all that, and footballers like the blokes I've met, there's not too many blokes that I'd say was a dickhead or whatever. There'd be very, very few, And even when I switched to St George, I met some of the nicest blokes, and I'd been playing all my life at Canterbury. And trips away and that, they all get together. But, Luke will tell you, when you're at that level too, you actually need to be good mates to each other too, I don't know what it's like these days. We all had jobs apart from work, apart from playing footy. But, to be a good bloke, there's some real elements there, and I think it's a great compliment when you're actually given that. You might be a good footballer in that, but in a lot of ways it's nice to be even known as a good fella.
We look forward to seeing that book published at some stage. Your thoughts on that? I mean, it's a very important part.
Oh, I can relate to that. I've got two young boys, so it's always a challenge as a dad that you got to set the examples, and I'm big on manners and honesty, and you got to set the tone for them, right? And thinking of that, it's kind of one of the main things I learned out of footy was sometimes you got to put your hand up when you've done something wrong. I think that's a crucial lesson, and that's why I try and drill into my boys. If you do something wrong, you own up to it. It's usually ends up being a lot less trouble in the end. And the other side of that, sometimes you just got to cop criticism as well if you do something wrong. And that's another thing I miss from footy is that brutal reality check where you do something wrong, or even on the training field, if you have to do someone sprays you and you just go, you know what, you're right, I'll cop it, and you move on. I miss that about team sports and just being in that area where everyone is going in the general goal and they'll do whatever it takes to get there. It's something that you don't get elsewhere in life, really.
Yeah, it's a special environment, and there's a lot of people looking at you, and and what you do there. But there's even more people looking at you when you walk into a pub, or you go somewhere. Even more people looking at you, and to be that decent individual, that decent person, is even more important. You've got a role to play to society, particularly with what you've been given.
While I've got you here, Steve, you did play for the Dragons in 83, 84, then back to the Bulldogs. Why was that?
Oh, I suppose when I left, there's probably a little story around it. Ross Conlon came to the club in 83. Anyway, I'd sort of got wind of the fact that Bullfrog had signed him. Anyway, one thing leads to another. It's what it is. But I had in my mind, I thought, a change mightn't be a bad thing. I'd been here for 8 years, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm not going to do as good as what I've did a couple of years prior to that. It's just one of those freak things that happen in your life. But I went to St George, and I think I became a better player. I think I had under Roy Masters. Roy probably wasn't as tactical as the Ted Glossops and the Mel Cliffs that when I had here. But I felt that I just grew as a player because I was with blokes that I'd obviously played against. Steve Rogers, for example, was a wonderful player, and you got Craig Young, Slippy Morris. I had a wonderful team, and but I thought I'd contributed to what I had to do. We had a job, we didn't win a comp after 2 years, so Sludge went back to Canterbury and I came back here. But I probably should have talked to Bullfrog because, the Wok, he didn't really want me back here, I don't think. He had some good players too, by the way, and some good young players coming through.
But it was a very different way of playing by that time.
Well, as I say, I'm only making about 12 tackles a year, so it's sort of, and the Wok was saying, "Yeah, mate, it's not going to survive here." But it'll be the way it goes. But it's but that's footy too.
Yeah,
and Luke will say the same thing. And you get back, and you get to the end of your stuff. And I finished up at Manly, and I played a couple of games there, and then I knew it was very much time. It had probably been a year or so. Probably I should have gone earlier, but you love the game, but it's just one of those things. But you got to go graceful too. You got to realise you haven't quite got that speed, or that you had when you're a young bloke, and the players that you haven't quite got that either. So your career comes and goes, but as long as you come out of it as a decent person too, you can't come out of it, being a mug, and it's. Yeah, I think that's the most important. And the Mortimer family, and myself, they have been wonderful friends right through to this day. And those sort of people right through the time, the users, all those people that spend time with, they make you the bloke that you are today too.
That has tremendous value beyond anything on the footy field. Are you happy with the way it all finished for you?
You know what? I kind of still had a year at the Dogs when I decided to go to England. And I just thought, similar to what Steve's saying, I couldn't train to the level or I knew I had to be at to be fast enough and do things in a game that I wanted to. And Benny Barber was coming through. I knew Benny was going to be a special talent as well. I didn't want to be that player that played a year too long and be in his way. There is sometimes I think maybe I should have just stayed and fought for that position and then I might have got involved in a different area going forward. But having said that, going to England, even though I signed for 3 years at Salford, I only played 2 because by the end of that year, my wife was putting my shoes and socks on. I couldn't bend over by the end for a few days after every game. And I was like, I can't keep going on like this. It won't be any good after footy. But having said that, I loved my time in England. It was like going back in time. Like no one cared about footy players over there at all. Obviously, it's all about the soccer. The English people are legends. I had no egos in my team. I really enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy playing in the snow. That was not fun, but I got to see a bit of the world. I would recommend to all NRL guys, if you get a chance to go to England, to do it. I think it's definitely an exciting and interesting way to do it. And it's like I said, there's less pressure on the footy. I think there's so much pressure in the NRL that you can't get away from it. Over there, it's totally different. So, I wouldn't change anything. I certainly do at times think, what if I'd done things differently? But it is what it is. I did think I could have stayed and tried to play 300 games as well, but I don't think that's what it's all about. I mean, you're lucky if you play that many games. That's just something that you can look at nicely when you're finished. It's not what you play the game for. You play it because you love it. So
yeah, I think don't you? You're sort of, and you're just not quite where you were. And the reality's got to kick in, and so it's an aggressive sport. It's a lot of contact and all that sort of stuff. I think you just got to know and. Sometimes you've just got to bite the bullet and just say, I'm not quite up to that standard anymore. So it hurts, but it didn't hurt.
Well, we appreciate very much what you did for us in the time you were on the field and a couple of good blokes, I'm sure you'll agree. Luke Patten, Steve Gearin, thanks for joining us on Bulldogs Unleashed.
All right, thanks, Bill.